It feels like one of those shifts you only recognize if you actually watch this league with both eyes open. The scoreboard says regular season, the timeline says early, but the temperature around one superstar in Memphis and one franchise in Los Angeles is rising at the same time. This is Lakers News Fan Report. I'm talking straight to you, one-on-one. Because if you're here, you're not looking for empty noise. You're here for real information, real context, and sharp speculation about moves that can actually change banners in this building. Tonight, I'm walking you through a storyline that's bigger than a tweet and more serious than a meme. The pressure building around Morant and the Grizzlies, the structural needs of the Lakers, the money, the risk, the culture, and why, for the first time, the idea of Morant in purple and gold has stepped out of pure fantasy and into that small category of scenarios smart people around the league at least have to keep on the board. To understand why this conversation even exists, I start in Memphis, not in Los Angeles. You've got a 26-year-old franchise guard already carrying heavy history, prior suspensions, public promises to grow, all the messaging about turning the page, new season, new staff, new tone. And then, after a bad night against the Lakers, he stands in front of the cameras and fires back at his own coaches, tells reporters to ask the staff what went wrong, hints they probably didn't even want him on the floor, and that moment escalates into a one-game suspension from his own organization for conduct detrimental to the team. That's not random drama. That's official language that every front office in the league files away. Stack that on top of a massive contract locked into his prime years, the responsibility of being the face of the franchise, and a track record that already burned through a lot of goodwill, and you're looking at a situation where, if things don't correct quickly, a small market team has to at least run simulations about life on the other side. I'm not saying Memphis is shopping him. I'm saying smart teams, including this one in Los Angeles, notice when the foundation between star and organization starts to shake in public. And on the floor, that's exactly why it's complicated. Morant is still that good. Even with bumps, even with criticism, the profile is electric. He's an elite downhill engine, one of the few guards in the league who can live in the paint possession after possession, collapse a defense with a single change of pace, force multiple defenders into the action, and turn simple two-man sets into open threes and lobs. When he's locked in, your transition game jumps a level. Your half-court offense starts from advantage instead of from a standstill. Opponents have to change their coverages, change their personnel, adjust their entire game plan the second he crosses half-court. His issues are not about whether he can hoop, they're about discipline, leadership, and trust. That mix, top-tier impact with real off-court questions, is exactly where blockbuster-level conversations are born. Memphis has to ask how many times they're willing to reset around the same guy. At some point, if trust keeps taking hits, the idea of turning that contract into multiple pieces in a cleaner locker room stops being outrageous and becomes a rational option on a whiteboard. Now shift to Los Angeles and look at this from our side. The Lakers do not exist to be respectable. This franchise operates on a binary. In the mix to win it all, or tearing it down until it can be again. In the current CBA, there's nothing worse than getting stuck in the middle. Too good to blow it up, not good enough to scare anyone in June. Look at this roster with a cold eye. There's size, there's experience, there are role players who can defend, hit shots and stretches, bring toughness. But you see the same thing I see when games slow down against elite opponents. We're missing that one young, relentless, star-level ball handler who forces the issue every single trip. Someone who gets 2 feet in the paint on command, punishes switches, lives at the line, and creates easy looks when the playbook gets scouted out and legs get heavy. Too often the offense leans on tough jumpers, late clock decisions, and stretches of basketball that feel more forced than inevitable. That's not sustainable if your goal is deep playoff series, not just appearances. So when you line that up with what Morant brings on his best nights, the basketball fit is obvious. A locked-in jaw in this environment changes the geometry. Put him at the top with a real screener, and every possession begins with pressure on the rim. Surround him with competent spacing, and you get open corner threes and vertical threats all night because defenses cannot sit and help and live. Play him alongside another star, and he becomes the downhill weapon that keeps weak side defenders glued to the action. Stagger him, and your bench-heavy lineups suddenly have an engine instead of surviving on hope. Over 82, that covers slow nights. In the playoffs, That constant rim pressure becomes your answer when teams load up on your first option. That's the pure hoop argument. In terms of profile, he's almost exactly what this roster has been missing. But if this was only about fit, we'd be done. It's not. Any honest talk about Ja Morant has to put the risk column right next to the highlight reel. You're inheriting a massive max deal in a CBA that punishes mistakes. You're attaching your brand to a player who has already cost himself games and goodwill, and who is now visibly clashing with the new coaching staff. If you trade for him, you're not testing the waters, you're all in. You pay in picks, you pay in young players, you pay in flexibility. And if anything goes seriously wrong again off the floor, you own that fallout. One more big incident, and suddenly your franchise is locked financially and culturally to a story you can't control. That's why most teams, even if they love the talent, would quietly stay away. They don't have the institutional weight, the market, or the leadership to handle the full package.
The Lakers are built differently, and that's why this topic doesn't feel like pure fantasy. This organization has decades of experience living under maximum pressure. Every star here is dissected daily. The standard is public and unforgiving. In the right conditions, that's not a problem. That's a filter. It keeps people honest. It rewards the ones who commit. It exposes anyone who isn't serious. A player who truly wants to turn a page and compete at the highest level gets structure, accountability, and a chance to rewrite his image in front of the biggest audience in the sport. From the Lakers' side, if they ever decide to even consider Morant, it would only be after real conversations with their leaders, deep background work, and a clear internal plan on how to protect the locker room while unlocking his game. No blind bets, no illusions. Then there's the trade math, and if you don't talk about it, you're not respecting the audience. To get into a real conversation, you're talking multiple first-rounders, probably swap rights, plus legitimate rotation salaries. Memphis, if it ever got there, would sell this as a strategic reset, not a desperation move. They would need to feel they're getting back control. For the Lakers, committing that level of capital to Morant means drawing your future around him as a foundational piece, not a side story. Under the current rules, that forces perfection everywhere else. No wasted roster spots, no dead money habits, just clean fits around a high-usage, high-impact guard. It is a narrow path. That's why we're breaking it down as possibility and not dressing it up as something it's not. There's also the narrative layer, and in Los Angeles, that's never separate from the basketball. This city has turned too loud, too risky, too complicated talents into champions when they chose to buy into the standard. When it works, it's powerful for everyone. The player flips his story, the franchise adds another chapter to its identity, the league gets a star thriving instead of spiraling. For Morant, a move here would not be a vacation. It would be a final exam. Either you show the maturity to match your talent, or the lights that were supposed to elevate you end up exposing you completely. For the Lakers, it would be a public statement that they believe they can convert volatility into edge without poisoning their culture. That's why, if this ever moved beyond theory, it would be talked about as a franchise-level bet on character and growth, not just as the Lakers add another name. So, where are we right now when we cut the hype? No agreement? No handshake? No sources say it's done. What exists is convergence. On one side, you have another visible incident in Memphis, a new suspension with that detrimental to the team tag, and growing questions about how many hits that relationship can absorb. On the other side, you have a Lakers team with a clear need for a player with his on-court profile, a history of taking big swings, and a market that can absorb the media earthquake a move like this would create. In the middle sits a league that knows you rarely get a shot at a talent like this and also knows you can't pretend his history doesn't exist. That blend is what makes Ja Morant to the Lakers worth a detailed breakdown on a serious channel, not just a throwaway line to farm views. There's also the narrative layer, and in Los Angeles, that's never separate from the basketball. This city has turned too loud, too risky, too complicated talents into champions when they chose to buy into the standard. When it works, it's powerful for everyone. The player flips his story, the franchise adds another chapter to its identity, the league gets a star thriving instead of spiraling. For Morant, a move here would not be a vacation, it would be a final exam. Either you show the maturity to match your talent, or the lights that were supposed to elevate you end up exposing you completely. For the Lakers, it would be a public statement that they believe they can convert volatility into edge without poisoning their culture. That's why, if this ever moved beyond theory, it would be talked about as a franchise-level bet on character and growth, not just as the Lakers add another name. So, where are we right now when we cut the hype? No agreement, no handshake, no sources say it's done. What exists is convergence. On one side, you have another visible incident in Memphis, a new suspension with that detrimental to the team tag, and growing questions about how many hits that relationship can absorb. On the other side, you have a Lakers team with a clear need for a player with his on-court profile, a history of taking big swings, and a market that can absorb the immediate earthquake a move like this would create. In the middle sits a league that knows you rarely get a shot at a talent like this, and also knows you can't pretend his history doesn't exist. That blend is what makes Morant to the Lakers worth a detailed breakdown on a serious channel, not just a throwaway line to farm views. There's also the narrative layer, and in Los Angeles, that's never separate from the basketball. This city has turned too loud, too risky, too complicated talents into champions when they chose to buy into the standard. When it works, it's powerful for everyone. The player flips his story, the franchise adds another chapter to its identity, the league gets a star thriving instead of spiraling. For Morant, a move here would not be a vacation, it would be a final exam. Either you show the maturity to match your talent, or the lights that were supposed to elevate you end up exposing you completely. For the Lakers, it would be a public statement that they believe they can convert volatility into edge without poisoning their culture. That's why, if this ever moved beyond theory, it would be talked about as a franchise-level bet on character and growth, not just as the Lakers add another name. So where are we right now when we cut the hype? No agreement, no handshake, no sources say it's done. It just exists as convergence. On one side, you have another visible incident in Memphis, a new suspension with that detrimental to the team tag, and growing questions about how many hits that relationship can absorb. On the other side, you have a Lakers team with a clear need for a player with his on-court profile, a history of taking big swings, and a market that can absorb the media earthquake a move like this would create. In the middle sits a league that knows you rarely get a shot at a talent like this, and also knows you can't pretend his history doesn't exist. That blend is what makes Morant to the Lakers worth a detailed breakdown on a serious channel, not just a throwaway line to farm views. There's another piece I want you to think about because it's central if this ever becomes more than theory: the strength of the locker room. This kind of move only works if your core is strong enough to set expectations from day one. The Lakers wouldn't be asking Morant to walk into a vacuum. He'd walk into a space with veterans who've lived deep playoff runs, staff used to bright lights, young players learning how to be pros in a market that doesn't forget. If he buys in, that room can sharpen him. Honest film sessions, real standards in practice, teammates who will hold him to what he says he wants to be. The pitch is simple. Come here to win and to rebuild your name the hard way, or don't come. And on the flip side, the organization has to be honest with itself. If they sense that buy-in isn't real, they cannot talk themselves into it just because the highlights are pretty. On the floor, if the buy-in is there, the roadmap is straightforward. You don't surround him with guys who need the ball to feel important. You surround him with length, defenders, screeners, and shooters who thrive off the advantages he creates. You open the floor, play faster, lean into his ability to turn any rebound into pressure. You let his rim attacks dictate rotations and build a half-court system that treats his paint touches like the starting point of everything. That's not forcing a name into a random structure. That's building a structure that finally matches the skills you've been missing. And that's where the optimism lives for me. If the off-court part aligns, the basketball case is one of the most logical star fits this team has seen in a long time. But there is absolutely a valid other side. Saying no to Morant would not mean a lack of ambition. It would mean believing that disciplined, deep, two-way roster construction can get you back to contention without tying the franchise to someone with this level of volatility. More dependable ball handlers, more big wings, multiple good decisions instead of one massive bet. That path is real. That's why this whole discussion is not about hype, it's about what kind of organization and what kind of fan base we see ourselves over the next 5 years. Live on the edge, chasing the highest possible ceiling with a player like Morant, or chase a more controlled climb without him? He sits right at the center of that identity question. My honest read for you, as someone who lives this team every day, is this. If Memphis stabilizes and Morant responds the right way, this fades like 100 other rumors, and that's fine. But if the tension keeps stacking, if the trust keeps taking public hits, and if the price ever adjusts to account for both the superstar upside and the real risk, the Lakers have to at least look at it. They're one of the few franchises with the pressure, the platform, and the expectations that make a move like this make sense to even discuss. At that point, it's not just about whether he can help you win, it's about whether you believe you can help him become the version of himself that wins. Before I close, I want you directly in this. You watch this team. You know the standards here better than anyone shouting from the outside. If that door ever truly opens and the cost is high but real, picks, young players, full commitment to him as a pillar, do you want the Lakers to go all in on Ja Morant and trust this structure to demand his best version? Or do you walk away, protect flexibility, keep building a deeper, steadier roster, and let someone else bet their future on him? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't just hit yes or no, tell me why. This community understands roster building, understands risk versus reward, and your voice is part of taking this idea seriously. My view is simple. If the Lakers ever make this move, it has to be with eyes wide open, with a clear leadership plan, and with the conviction that they are building a true contender around a locked-in professional, not just chasing the next big headline. Right now, with what we know, this is not a done deal. It's a live, complicated what-if sitting in the background of a strained relationship in Memphis and a Lakers roster that still feels one major piece short of its highest form. Treated with respect, it's one of the most intriguing conversations in the league. Treated with hysteria, it's just more noise.